Ulysses, the Portrait of an Artist. The author uses himself and uses people he knows, but he develops essentially composite characters. I mean, that's the name of that game. These are tendencies extracted from actual people. The people aren't transferred intact and as they actually are. I mean, this is not journalism. This is this is fiction.
Hey, dickheads! Like a pink laser beam of truth beaming from Seattle, Ohio, San Diego to your brain hole. We are your personal dickheads. We have not been sent to boarding school in Ohio, but we are here to talk about Puttering About in a Small Land. This is one of Phil's realist novels, so we're going to get real into it here soon, and like an idiot, I put away my notes right as we were about to start talking. But anyways, I am one of your personal dickheads, your longtime host, David Agranoff, and I am the author of The Last Night to Kill Nazis, which is currently available nationwide at Barnes & Nobles. Professor Wilson, tell the folks who you are and what you do.
I am David Wilson, a.k.a. D. Harlan Wilson. I am a professor of English at a terrible institution in rural Ohio. My latest book is a playful ultra-biography of Nietzsche, and later this year I have a book on Kubrick's Futurist trilogy coming out called Strangelove Country that was originally placed with Liverpool University Press, but it proved too controversial, among other things, so I pulled it from the press. And now it will be put out by Stalking Horse Press, which put out my book on Daniel Paul Schreiber in 2019.
Yes.
Thank you.
And your editor is James Reich, who,
That's
friend of
right.
the podcast, came on
That's
and covered Maltzberg's Beyond Apollo on the show.
Absolutely. Excellent writer and a good man.
Yes. We love James Reich around here. So, Larry.
What?
Tell them who you are, what you do.
I am Langhorne J. Tweed.
Right. All right. So our special guest today is Frank Hollander. And so we're going to go a little deeper into Frank so you guys can know who he is. Frank has been a bucket list guest of mine. I think I have Facebook messages going back 2 years trying to nail down Frank to come on here and talk about the man, the myth, the legend, Philip K. Dick. Frank, tell the folks who you are and how did you become such a serious dickhead?
Well, if you want to make it relatively long, it really goes back. I grew up in the 70s. I just got to be known as the person who obsessively would know all these details.
Knows everything.
That pretty much gets us to today. We can talk about the book if you actually want to talk about the book.
Well, first we got to do PKD news, and Professor Wilson will have an announcement as a part of this, and we'll get to that. PKD news. There is some PKD news. The finalists for the 2024 PKD Awards have been announced, and they include Danged Black Thing by one of your authors, Professor Wilson, Eugene Bacon.
That's right.
But that's not one of your books. It's Apex's book that got nominated.
You didn't have to say that.
All right. The Museum of Human History by Rebecca Bergman from Tin House. Infinity Gate by M.R. Carey, which is one of my top reads of the year. I loved that book. Wild Spaces by S.L. Coney. And Where Rivers Go to Die by Dilman Dilia. And the last one is These Burning Stars by Bethany Jacobs. My vote would be for M.R. Carey's book, but that's because it's the only one I've read. So
might be a little prejudice there.
Yes, and as always, every year when we do this, the award is presented annually to a distinguished work of science fiction originally published in paperback form. It doesn't necessarily mean
that is the main criteria, not being like a Philip K. Dick book.
Exactly. And one of this year's judges is friend of the podcast, many-time guest, Lisa Yazik.
Yay!
Yeah.
Lisa's
So Lisa is one of the judges this year. And it will be held March 28th through the 31st in Seattle, Washington, and NorwestCon that will be given out there.
Wait, when will it be?
It will be March 28th through the
Okay.
31st.
Plug Lisa's really great books that she edited, The Future is Female, volumes 1 and 2, and I think there's a third volume coming out through the Library of America.
Yes, and we interviewed Lisa about Volume 1 on this here podcast, and I interviewed her about Volume 2 on my other podcast. So Lisa has been on the show a couple times. She was on our Judith Merrill panel, and she was on the Academics in Quarantine panel.
Yeah.
So she's been on here a couple times. We love Lisa Yazik around here. So the next thing I've got, and this is something we're going to be doing an episode about, which is in Montana, there was a production of 800 Words, The Transmigration of Philip K. Dick, a play by Victoria Stewart. And we are next Sunday, a week from this recording, we are recording an interview with the playwright, the co-director of the play, who also played Philip K. Dick in Montana. So we're going to have a panel, and we're going to be talking about that. So that's another thing. But I thought it was cool that this play was getting done in Montana, of all places, right? Last episode, we talked about a random Philip K. Dick event in Kentucky. So we're reaching the flyover states, folks, with this stuff. And I did see an article about, we've done this a couple times, where I found articles where some musician has pointed out that they are influenced by Philip K. Dick. There's a experimental rap duo called Angry Black Men, who listed Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Richard Matheson's I Am Legend as one of their biggest influences.
Interesting.
Which is interesting. I went and listened to one of their songs, and I didn't hear direct reference, but it was pretty Dickian. So I had some kind of what is reality type thing going on.
Vibe to it. Do you know what kind of rap it is?
It's experimental, whatever that means. But
It's not like trip hop or anything like that.
It was pretty strange. It wasn't like, I listened to a couple songs, and it wasn't like modern hip hop, but it didn't have like an old school. It just had it was a very unusual, like, had a weird flow to it. I liked it. It was good. And
I'll have to give it a shot.
Yeah, we tipped off Greg Cox let Richard Matheson's daughter know about it, and she was very amused that a hip hop group was influenced by her father, which I thought was funny. So we have some close to us Philip K. Dick news, publishing news. Professor Wilson, do you want to kick that off a little bit?
Sure. So as editor-in-chief of Anti-Oedipus Press, which is, going into its 11th year now, we're going to be starting a new series, quasi-academic series, I guess, but certainly not limited to academic books. It's called, well, I'll just read, this is a preliminary description of the series. I'll just read it aloud, and then I'll make a comment or two. It's called Exegetics PKD Studies, apropos. And, well, here's what I've written so far. This new series will be devoted to original high-quality scholarship on and about Philip K. Dick, one of the science fiction genre's most renowned innovators and a singular voice in 20th century literature. Books in this series include critical and/or creative explorations of Phil Dickian fiction, nonfiction, biography, cinema, and multimedia. And then this part is important. Scholarly yet defiant of academic stodge, Exegetics aspires for the definitively new in the worlds of PKD.
We're the PKD news this time. Isn't that crazy? Anyways, anything else on that, Professor Wilson, or are we gonna?
No, that's good.
All right. So we're gonna start talking about Puttering About in a Small Land. So Okay, so the writing and publication history of this.
Not doing the year?
Well, yeah. This was written in the year 1957. It was published in the year 1985.
David, what were happening in those years?
Well, it's funny you should ask. Because I really wanted to make a comparison here between what was happening in the world when it was written in 1957 and when it was published in 1985. So, some historical events. January 3rd, the Hamilton Watch Company made the first digital watch in 1957. The Kira Kurosawa movie Throne of Blood was released in Japan on January 15th of that year. Dwight D. Eisenhower was privately sworn in for his second term. The number one song in the country was Singing the Blues by Guy Mitchell and his orchestra. The most popular movie that month was The Bridge on the River Kwai, and the number one TV show was Gunsmoke. Now, when it was released in 1985, the space shuttle Atlantis made its maiden flight. Reagan was president. Take on Me was the number one hit song. The Miami Vice theme was number 4, by the way. And Commando was the number one movie in the country. And the number one TV show was The Cosby Show.
And
So that's like
non-digital watches called Swatch watches were the most popular watch.
That's true. Digital watches had come a long way.
They
So
were
the-
calculators by this point.
Yeah. So it's a long period between when this was written and when it was published. As far as the writing and publication history and what we know about the writing of it, it was written in late 56 to early 57. Now, Frank might correct me on a little bit of this, but for as far as I know, Puttering was written after Cosmic Puppets and before Variable Man, the short story. And so for those of you who've been listening for a long time know that we beat up on the Cosmic Puppets because those of us on this show who've been here for a long time, we hated Cosmic Puppets. And so it's really interesting to me that, you know, he wrote this right after Cosmic Puppets, and it's just it's a whole.
Yeah, I got to correct you on that. Sorry, David A.
Okay, go ahead.
The Cosmic Puppets was published in 56 or so, but that was actually a story that he wrote back in 53.
Right, you're talking about
stuff too, right?
Yes, the Glass of Darkness, right? Was the original? Yeah.
Well, Glass of Darkness, it was originally published in a magazine in 56, but it took a few years to sell it. And you also mentioned Variable Man. The Variable Man collection was published around then in 57, probably.
So he probably did the edits for that, is probably what they're.
I'm guessing he did not a single bit of edit, but if he did any edits, yeah, he did it then. But Variable Man was a very early story.
Yeah.
From the 52 period even.
Yeah, these are Lord Running Clam's before and afters.
But throwing Lord Running Clam under the bus, huh?
Well, I'm not going to throw Lord Running Clam under the bus. I love David Hyde. But what I will say is that I think what his numbers are coming from is that I do believe between the Glass of Darkness version and the Ace version, there was some heavy rewrites. So he may have listed it because of the rewrites.
That's probably why he listed it. I don't actually agree with that opinion about Cosmic Puppets. I think Cosmic Puppets was actually a reversion to his original type script, and the Glass of Darkness text in the magazine was heavily edited by the magazine editors. I don't think Dick actually revised it, but that kind of gets into the weeds on things that aren't entirely relevant. But if he did edit it, then yes, it was.
I worry about this stuff.
Yeah,
I like to know this stuff. So, but yes, and the So we do know the date that Puttering About in a Small Land ended up at SMLA. It was May 15th, 1957. So we do know that that was the exact date when it came in. And as we talked about in Gil's class last week, we talked a lot about something that was going on, which was that the agents at SMLA, his agency, they had a system by which when manuscripts came in for short stories, for novels, or for whatever, there was a crew of people who worked for Scott Meredith reading these manuscripts, and they were paid $5 for short stories, $25 for novels, to read these manuscripts and write out these green cards that kind of gave notification or like as they passed on to the other agents on what they thought of these works. And so we were recently having a discussion in Gil's class about like who was writing these green cards and what these green cards meant, because Greg Rickman was on to talk about the mainstream and the realist novels. And so a lot of what we know about what was thought of for these novels by the agents and by the people who were submitting them was from these green cards. And we don't know who wrote them. That's one of the things. That's the mystery. We do know that lots of famous people within the science fiction community worked writing these green cards and reading these manuscripts over the years. Barry Malzberg did this for a while. Frederick Paul did this for a while. Damon Knight did this for a while. He wrote about it in his book, In Search of Wonder. So a lot of people did that. So who wrote this green card? Who knows? But the green card for Puttering About in a Small Land says, quote, usual serious Dick novel, less murky than others, but overlong, confused, is basically ironic comedy, but overwritten, distasteful. So who wrote that? Who knows? Frank, do you have any comments on the green
That's a good
card?
selling point for me. It sounds great.
That's everything you look for in a novel.
Yeah, totally.
I know we talked, Frank, the other day about these green cards. So anything you want to say about that?
I think the green cards are key mainly for the lost novels, of which two of them preceded this novel. Like the way I have the sequence, he did The Man Who Japed, and then A Time for George Stavros and Pilgrim on the Hill, both lost novels, and in both cases the readers at the Meredith Agency, said they were long, tedious kind of things. And then The Broken Bubble, which we do have, and then Puttering About in a Small Land. And Puttering About in a Small Land was actually the last one he wrote really as a straight mainstream. In this period. From there, he wrote Nicholas and the Higgs, which is the most regrettably lost one, because that was more of a hybrid SF one. And then he wrote Time Out of Joint.
Yeah.
But
Nicholas and the Higgs was pretty much science fiction, though. I mean,
yeah. I mean, these cards kind of give us a hint of what the agency thought of them and how they would potentially route them to publishers. I think there's plenty of evidence that they were pretty close to getting a deal on one novel or another, but I'd say the key word in that particular one was what did he say at the end? It was
distasteful.
Distasteful. I think there's a lot of stuff in this novel that the mainstream publishing houses would have had to cut. Like there's a whole chapter, 17 maybe. Yeah, I think 17. It's basically the Liz and Roger having sex. Not real explicit by our standards, but I think a lot of that stuff is a hard sell. And so if a reader's calling that distasteful, I think that's a lot of what they're talking about. And
why? Because he says inside her like 18 times.
Yeah. And it wouldn't necessarily be hard to edit a lot of that stuff out or tone it
Change
down,
the
but
language a little.
it would change it. And for someone who hadn't been published in the mainstream at all, I think a lot of that stuff was a hard sell back then.
I wondered that constantly while I was reading, especially with the sex stuff, because now, today we wouldn't even notice it. But right? I mean, it's really tame.
Well, we would notice if it was written like this.
Well,
but,
because it's not because
the
it's too
actual
soft.
content.
Yeah, it's too soft for by today's standards.
Yeah, it's
But
frighteningly so.
I don't have my problem is I don't have a frame. I'm not familiar with enough mainstream literature of the 50s of this nature to make a commentary on whether how transgressive or whatever you want to call it that sort of thing is. Yeah, Frank, you might have a better perspective on that, but maybe we should hold off, David, until you're done.
Yeah. We'll get into what the and the things about the book, but so I don't want Frank to answer this because I think he might know, but Langhorne and Professor Wilson, how many times do you guys guess that this book was rejected? Just guess.
18.
7.
Langhorne is closer. It was rejected 8 times.
Oh, geez.
So it was submitted and rejected 8 times, which is less than some of them because I think I read there was one that got rejected 13 times, I think. I'd have to look at my notes for unfinished, but he definitely dealt with a lot of rejection for these novels. And of course there was, and Rickman talked about this recently, is that he got these all returned to him in a big package in the mid 60s. Like that they just sent all these novels back.
They're like 5 novels, right?
Yeah, and some of them, well, no, more than that, but that's how I think some of them got lost in the shuffle, and some of them never made it back. And what we do know, and we talked about her, and if you guys remember from the man whose teeth were all exactly alike, I said it exactly correct.
Well done.
Whatever, he can walk away. When we talked about this in the last episode, is that Eleanor Dimoff was a huge thing, but she was a person who strung him along and took lots of notes gave him lots of notes on the novels, and then ended up not buying them. So I don't know that Eleanor Dimoff had anything to do with this one. I didn't see any evidence of that, but we know that she looked at George Stavros and potentially Nicholas and the Higgs, but that she looked at several of his mainstream realist novels, but I don't believe this is one of them. I haven't seen any evidence. Frank, have you seen anything to see that she looked at this one? Because I haven't seen anything.
Not offhand, no, and I didn't dig into much of that. Just
and I did look to see if there was any sign of who were these 8 publishers who rejected this, but the thing is SMLA didn't put as much of attention or energy into selling these books. They were really good at selling science fiction, and if you look at their clientele, it was a lot of science fiction writers, and they had a few mainstream authors, but mostly their clientele were your Arthur C. Clarke's, J.G. Ballard, who Professor Wilson wrote a book about that I have right here, so most of SMLA's clients were in genre. So, all right.
I think that's the key thing. It was mostly just genre fiction. They didn't have a big clientele in like highbrow literary works.
Yeah, and look at all these famous science fiction writers that worked there. Your Maltzbergs, your Damon Knights, your Judy Merrills. They all worked at SMLA for a reason. It's because when they're getting all these science fiction manuscripts in, if you're going to hire somebody to read them, why not somebody who's in that community and is a part of it? Professor Wilson, are you ready to act as Paul Williams? Do you want from Paul Williams? We don't have many quotes from Phil, so you don't get to pretend to be Phil today.
All right. Here's what Paul says. Publication of this novel, Puttering, tentatively scheduled for spring 85, may well provide the springboard for a reappraisal and discovery of PKD as an important American novelist by the literary establishment in the U.S. I also believe Puttering will be very enthusiastically received in Europe. It is a novel of the human condition, cruder, lacking the subtle ironies and textured writing of crap artist, but more passionate, more joyous, and more despairing, full of empathy, very alive. The characters are Roger, cautious, tenacious, owner of a store that sells and repairs TVs, plus a prick, plus a racist, etc. We'll get into that. Wife almost starts a race riot at some point. No, that's not Paul, that's me. Back to Paul. His wife, Virginia, intellectual, nervous, at least partially based on PKD's mother, Dorothy. Their son, Chick.
A little bit.
A businessman with plans for Roger's store, and Chick's wife, Liz, a vivacious woman who says whatever comes into her head. One of PKD's most memorable characters, and mysteriously one who does not seem to recur in his later work. Roger and Liz, against all reason, have a passionate affair, and their little worlds start to fall apart, but not necessarily for the worst. Publication of Puttering will provide a new perspective on much of PKD's later work. In fact, perhaps Liz Bonner is in some sense a forerunner, in heart, not in intellect, of Xena and the Divine Invasion. The setting is Los Angeles in the early 1950s. Puttering was probably completed in early 57. After 28 years, it will be published at last.
All right. So he's obviously trying to sell the book. He's involved as part of the literary estate of selling it. So this is trying to sell it. And we're going to get into the merits and merits for and lack of merits when we get into talking about the themes of the book. But I think some of the really interesting things that he's saying here is I thought it interesting that he's kind of called it cruder and lacking the subtle ironies and textured writing of crap artists, because in a lot of ways I like it better than crap artists. So but I thought it was interesting that he like kind of downplayed that it might not be as good as some of these other ones, but here's all the things that are good about it. I guess he's just him being honest, but I found this to be an interesting quote. Does anybody else have anything to say about this?
Well, crap artist is more for the mainstream novels. It seems as if PKD is making some effort to be vaguely surreal in the vein of classic surrealism, whereas with Puttering, that's not there. You know?
But he does use, I mean, he uses some literary techniques in this book that are
Sure.
kind of obvious, but I mean, yeah, I obviously like crap artists a lot more than this one, but that's because it tells a much more accessible story, but as horrifying as it goes along.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the key difference is that while it's horrifying, you can relate to it more, whereas this one's sort of out of everybody's touch.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I think I like Puttering better, but we'll get to
But
that.
I do want to say there other books that came out, popular books that came out in 57 are Atlas Shrugged, On the Road, Franny and Zooey, Dr. Zhivago, Dandelion Wine, and anything else important in here? Not very important. That's about, I mean, that's.
But he's not right. Those books are in a sort of different class than this one. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, yeah.
You're just pointing out what
there
books
is
were
experimental in there. I mean, On the Road is a very, very experimental book.
Sure.
And I also looked up what's his name? Oh shit. I looked up The Killer Inside Me by Jim Thompson, which came out in 52. That has a fair amount of sex in it and kind of horrifying scenes in the same vein kind of as this one.
Where did that come out from a mainstream publisher though? As like a literary novel?
Yeah, it came out as a crime novel by Fawcett.
Okay.
So I don't know if it, I mean,
at least a genre novel.
yeah, it makes it a genre novel, but
Yeah.
I just wonder what he was using as a what was his template for writing this sort of book?
Exactly. I was trying
I don't
to
think
get
it's
a
any
little,
of the
just a
books.
little, slice of what was being published at that time. So.
Yeah.
Well, and we know that in genre was like supposed to be this huge deal when Philip Jose Farmer did The Lovers, which was like, that was the one that like, cracked the seal on you were allowed to write about
Bridging
sex
the
in
gap.
science
Yeah.
fiction. Yeah. And all right, so the next
Yeah.
quote.
Yeah, excuse me. One other point on that. I think
Okay.
a key thing there in what Paul Williams was trying to do was that was an attempt to get mainstream acceptance in 1985, and the publisher, Academy something Chicago, Academy Chicago Publishers. That was not a genre house of any sort. It's definitely a small press. It was very odd, but that was the only one of these mainstream novels that were published in the 80s at Philip K. Dick that was not a genre publication of some sort. And so I think he was probably trying to emphasize that too. It's like, well, maybe the literary establishment will finally get it because look, he's broken through.
Right. Yeah, and I think the fact that it was from like kind of a mainstream, more academic type press was probably one of the reasons why he was trying to get acceptance, as you say. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Now, we are going to get more into this next quote when we're actually talking about the book, but Professor Wilson, can you pretend to be the recently departed Ray Nelson?
Yes, and this is a short one. Puttering gets a new ending. The original ended at the end of chapter 20 with the words, "It would bother me," plus a little moving vehicle coda, now lost. Now the hero's mean wife demands the hero's store and gets it. 2 new chapters give the hero a new lease on life and a carload of TV sets to sell. End quote. But he actually steals those from his wife, does he not?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
supposed to be
so-
her just desserts, I guess.
So this is the page he's talking about. And you can see in
Ah.
my version, I wrote, Ray Nelson said it ended here, the first draft. And that is page 281 of the Galanche, the European edition. So at the end of chapter 21. So there's 2 chapters after that. Now, this is the only argument, by the way, that there was an Eleanor Dimoff involved, because it is possible that the reason why he added these 2 chapters and did not have the original ending that he wanted is that some editor gave him the clue like, hey, I might be interested in this book, but you need to make this change. And we know that his relationship with Eleanor Dimoff is that she would offer suggestions, he would make changes, he would resubmit, and then she wouldn't publish them. So that's how it happened. So this is the only evidence that there may have been an Eleanor Dimoff or somebody else but the thing is, you don't know. It could have been another publisher. He got rejected 8 times. So one of those 8 times, somebody could have said, you know what? I like this, but I feel like there needs to be more. I feel like, and I'm guessing someone said, I think the wife needs to have some success here at the end.
Yeah, that's why I actually like chapter 21, which is the chapter after this.
Yeah.
And I despise chapter 22.
Well, and we'll get to all that. But
Incidentally, I love chapter 22.
Of course you do.
Yeah, it could also be that he was getting some flack for chapter 20 pretty much ending on a discussion of birth control devices. It doesn't seem
like a very good ending, does it?
And well, what seemed, and listen, I'm reading some text here, and there's no voice or tone, but I got the feeling that Ray Nelson thought it should have ended the way that it did. and that he was kind of
I
suggesting
can
like,
hear that in that quote.
yeah. I don't know.
Well,
I mean, I got the feeling that that's kind of how he felt like, and part of the thing is that I've also read some quotes about how from Ray Nelson where he's talked about those additional endings that we always talk about in here. I saw a quote where he talked about like that books should have ended sooner or whatever. So I could be reading too much into this,
Yes.
and but I'm not entirely certain on that. So this is all just guesswork. So just keep in mind we're just
Me and Ray.
speculating
We're
here.
like this. Me and Ray.
Yeah. And I know some people get mad when I speculate about things, but we don't have
Speculate
a
all
lot.
you want.
We don't have a lot to go on about what Phil thought about this book because he didn't talk about it. It wasn't like and actually I didn't look in his own words to
Man in
see
the High Castle.
if he mentioned it. I don't think that he did, but he just didn't talk about this book a lot. So we don't have much to say. It wasn't like he was like, like, hey, Tim Powers, come on. Hey, Powers, come on over here and talk to me about puttering about in a small land. That wasn't happening,
I mean,
Of all the interviews, I haven't heard this mentioned at all. So.
Not once. Yeah.
it's probably is it the longest mainstream book?
No.
What's longer?
But Voices from the Street is longer.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I haven't
and-
gotten it.
Gather
and
yourselves together.
probably the lost ones, if not all of them, some of them are longer from the descriptions. But
Okay.
Yeah.
in
Nicholas
general, the
and Higgs-
mainstream novels are longer than the science fiction, though.
Yeah, Nicholas and the Higgs was very long, and then he cut it short, and we have neither version. So,
But of his published novels, Voices from the Street is definitely the longest.
Now, are you guys going off the published novel or the manuscripts being longer?
finished published. I
Okay.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going by word count that you can get from the ebooks.
Oh, okay.
All right, it's time for
What?
the story.
Break it down.
All right, go.
Woo! Give
Give
me
us
the
the story
horns.
breakdown. I might start stretching.
Let's see. This book is called Puttering About in a Small Land, Not a Small World. And it is by Philip K. Dick. And here is my book report. So, I think personally that Anthony would have liked this first chapter because it is probably one of his best first chapters of all time.
Wow.
It is exciting. There's action, there's tension, there's relationship building, there's everything you would want in a first chapter. It doesn't start slow, it starts right in the middle of the action, just like any modern novel says to do. Every time you submit something, they're like, why doesn't that start right in the middle of the action?
In media res.
Yes, I was just going to say, what is the theater term for that?
And so that's the highlight of the book for me is the first chapter. Second chapter, we meet our protagonists, or one of our protagonists. And
Following the PKD formula.
He is he's like I call him the Sour Patch Kid. Because, at first he's sour, then he's sweet. Or is it sweet and then sour? I don't know. But he comes out, first time we meet him, he says, you did all the wrong things. I hate you, stupid wife. I'm going to go fix this shit. I'm going to take the kid and fuck this shit. And I hate everything. And that's how we meet him. And so he goes up to the school where the wife had tried to, the wife's name is Virginia, by the way. And his name is Roger Lindahl. Anyway, I'm not taking your advice on names.
That is a good policy.
So anyway, he takes their son up to the school that Virginia was trying to get him in and had given the woman a check for putting him in the school. And Roger, without explaining himself, just goes and takes the check back. Says, I don't want to, I hate school. Schools suck. I'm mad at everything for no reason. And then we get some flashbacks of a softer, gentler time where Roger was charming, nice, sort of lost in the world, but still finding his way as a young man. He didn't know where he was going or what he was doing. He had plans to go to California, but they weren't hard plans. They were sort of pipe dream plans. And he meets this girl that he kind of likes at a party and decides, well, let's see if I can make this happen. So that ends up being Virginia. And they become a couple. They eventually decide to move to the West Coast, to LA in specific during World War II, to get jobs at factories, airplane factories, which were very popular here on the West Coast back then, and they still are now. One of the biggest companies in San Diego is still a plane building company, whatever you call them. Hewlett Packard? No, wait. Whatever they are.
Brenners, right?
I don't know what it is.
Well, the Naval Command, War Command production thing is here too.
Yeah.
Pass it every day on the bus.
Anyway, so yeah, that was big stuff then, big stuff now. But so they move out to LA. They get a little apartment in a wartime building that was constructed just for this purpose, for getting factory workers and having them have a place to stay. They work at the factory day and night. They barely see each other, which can extend a marriage or ruin it. In this case, it extends a marriage. And the problems start when Roger meets the other protagonist couple, which is Liz Bonner and Chick Bonner. Chick Bonner. Chick is a largish man, red-haired, sort of Irish-looking guy with freckles and stuff. And their two sons are much the same as him, although miniature versions. And Virginia and Roger's son is a lot. Those kids are 12 and 11 or something, and their kid is 7, sort of weedy, has asthma, sort of just kind of a wimpy kid, like much like I was when I was a kid, a bit of a wimp. And so the kid's uncomfortable about going to the school, but there's stuff he likes, like seeing horses. Roger grew up on a farm. That'll play in a little bit. Virginia has an overbearing mother who is amazing. And so they're going along. They have this job. They're doing the thing. Then they have the kid and stuff happens. And then they're at the school. He meets the couple and says that Liz is kind of ugly, but there's something about her that he kind of likes. And Roger's like, what a number she is. But she's kind of got a doll face, you know what I mean? But he's still lost because he lost his factory job, and Virginia lost her factory job, so there's kind of struggling, but kind of not. And there's this whole thing about the mother-in-law giving them money so that he can open a TV shop. So he opens this TV shop, and it's kind of like a bro club, but they still do decent business. But Roger gets this thought stuck in his head that he has to sleep with Liz. And through the book, she gets more and more attractive, which is kind of a beautiful thing, I guess. And that sort of works at times in real life. It does for me, anyway. Every woman I've ever dated, I thought was meh when I first met them, and then became amazing later on. Except for Marty. That's a whole different story. And so...
It's his wife he's talking about, yeah. You liked her right away, is what you're trying to dig yourself out of that hole?
Yeah, from the second I saw her.
Yes. Okay.
Help him.
When I was 16.
Okay. Is she standing right there?
No, she's not.
Okay. Just
And then, so what else happens? Oh, right. So stuff happens, blah, blah, blah. He's a dick. The mother-in-law yells at him, and then he goes off on the mother-in-law. And basically, Roger and Liz are like two teenagers because neither one of them have a thought in their fucking heads. And so he's like this child that anytime he's confronted with any kind of obstacle, he immediately recedes into himself and doesn't respond in any way. He is a coward. He is a fool, a coward, and a jerk. Anyway.
Tell us what you really think about Roger.
I did not like that man. And so Liz is not much better. She's sort of an airhead party girl, but in 50s style party girl, not sort of the pixie girlfriend that they talk about nowadays, the manic pixie girlfriend. She was like one of the original manic pixie girlfriends. And so they sleep together in the worst way possible. Like, get a clue. You know, I mean, yeah, the motel was fine, but then you guys like freak out when you get out of there. No, don't freak out. You got to play it cool, man. And I know this stuff. I cheated on everyone. And so,
except for Marty.
Yeah, sure. Go with that. No, I didn't cheat on Marty.
All right. And just making sure you point that out.
Anyway, so they sleep together in a motel on the way back from the school after they drop off the kids. Liz freaks out a little, but it's cool. So they find a time to sleep together again, but they do it in her house, which, look, if you're going to cheat on someone, you need a third party. You need someone, a friend of yours, to like give you his place, let you have the spare room, and not have any trouble. Sort of like they did in the last chapter. But so they sleep together, and they're such fools that they get caught. Virginia is onto them in a heartbeat because she actually is intelligent. And she's like, well, wait, why did this happen? Why did this? Well, this is fucking, yeah, she's fucking, he's fucking her. This is what's happening. I know it's happening. He knows it's happening. She knows it's happening. They know I know it's happening. So the only way he'll ever admit to anything instead of receding into himself is if I catch him red-handed. And then he still won't admit it, but at least everyone will know. So I'm going to take my mom to where they're fucking, catch them fucking, and then, boom, I have rights to do anything I want to. I am the owner of my destiny. Instead of him owning the business, I'll own the business. And I'll get this great deal with Chick Bonner, who laid out this whole thing about bigger store and more profit and all that shit. So, by the end, we've had a whole swimming with sharks sort of thing where this bad situation turned good for the underdog, and the jerks are fine too. They're happy sleeping with each other and in the kids' school, and it's not creepy at all, but it is a little creepy. And that's it. That's the end of the book.
All right, let's get into the themes. You guys want to?
Frank, what did you think of that?
It's pretty close.
Okay. Well, wait. What about the coda?
There was no coda, really. I mean, that last chapter is a coda. Yeah, there is a coda, but it wasn't extensive this time. It wasn't 40 pages.
No. I just wasn't that last chapter that you hated. And then I loved. I just wasn't expecting that he was going to. I mean, we can talk about
Yeah,
it.
it was sort of out of the blue, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like
I mean, he
all of a
robbed.
sudden, Mrs. Ant is their best friend. Like, sure, you can have this room and fucking it. It's fine. I don't care. You're my friends.
So we'll get there. The
Yeah.
themes that I have are autobiography / oh high school, mom dad issue,
OJ. I believe it's
Mom.
pronounced OJ.
Hmm.
TV sales / world building, setup and payoff, race and gender, and infidelity. So one thing about the ending,
And sex in general.
yeah, we'll definitely get to that. So I have, as usual, I have lots of notes on the page. I will agree with you, Larry, that the opening chapter is surprisingly strong for this, because, and I think this has to do with, and that's the first thing, which is the autobiographical and things going on with Ojai. I wondered, and I've already talked to Professor Wilson about this. We talked on the phone the other day. I wondered if I didn't like this more than some other people would, because I just recently went on a trip to Ojai, and I felt like a complete idiot because I didn't think to go look for the school when I was there. It just didn't occur to me.
What were you doing in Ojai?
We were just having a Halloween. Carrie's birthday is Halloween, and we went up for her birthday for a couple of days in Ojai. And it's a really great place to visit. It's up in the mountains. It's really pretty, north of LA, and you can take the train from San Diego up there. So we took the train up there, got a hotel room, and the hotel we came with had bikes. So I was biking all over town, and I really liked Ojai. I thought it was a really cool and pretty place. So part of me wondered that if it wasn't just that I was just in Ojai, that I was very interested in this. And I do think it's interesting that he said it in LA and not the Bay Area, because when Phil was sent to Ojai, it was a much further drive, and I think it makes sense to put it in LA.
Is that why he makes it sound like it's this death march to drive an hour and a half?
Well, here's why I think he made it sound that way. So he definitely moved it to LA because of the back and forth, that he wanted the more back and forth, because when Phil went to Ojai, he wasn't coming home for weekends. He was not, like, he was too far away for, like, Dorothy, and what was her second husband's name? I'm brain farting his name, but his stepfather, they were not, I'm not sure if he was even in the picture, though, by that point, with Ojai. It would have just been her. So she wasn't going to be going and getting him. He was staying there on weekends, and we know that a lot of Phil's issues were with the coldness of his mother and the lack of affection that he got from her. And I think this chapter is so strong is because it plays with the whole abandonment of, like, what's the kid's name is Greg, right? Greg definitely is, like, he likes it when he gets there and he starts playing with the kids and all that, but at first he's like, well, are you gonna leave me here? And I think the first example of that being on page 11,
And being a kid with a shitty childhood, this sounds amazing to me. Like, this is the best. You mean I don't have to be around you fuckers? This sounds amazing.
Well, right. And speaking as somebody who did go to boarding school, but I didn't go to boarding school until I was a sophomore in high school. But I was stoked when I was going to go away. But I think if I had been in elementary school, it might have been harder, because I think that as young as he was, that's why it was.
But we're also, too, dealing with, this is less the case nowadays. We could talk endlessly about it. But the further you go back in history, the more, generally speaking, the more children are treated as objects, right? I mean, Greg is very much an object that, Roger's always referring to him as a little shit. You better behave or I'll swipe you across the head, and so on and so forth, right? Children are best heard and not seen. Or excuse me, seen and not
Seen
heard.
and not heard.
Yeah.
So, the highway to Ojai now is pretty big, and it's still a little windy, and you're going up a lot of hills and mountains and stuff. And Ojai is in the mountains. So, but now there's like a full bike lane that goes all the way to the coast from Ojai, 15 miles, if you wanted to do it, and you could do it on a bike. But I think at the time the road would have been much thinner, and it probably would have been especially after you drive an hour and a half from Los Angeles first, and then have to take these windy roads. I think that's what he was trying to say. I know he kind of made it sound like a death march, but it would have been a pain in the ass to do it twice a week, I think.
Yeah, well, he had them going up Route 99, which, as I read it, it was that's now a stretch of I-5 now.
Yeah.
But back before the interstate highway system, it was a multi-lane highway, but you had to somehow take left turns off of it.
No, there's plenty of highways that do that though. So
yeah, but I think it still would have been
2-lane highways.
But biographically, in his I guess early teen years, he went to Ojai. But his experience going to a boarding school at the age of Greg in this novel was actually in D.C. And so I think what's written up in this novel is kind of a hybrid of those two things. I think the D.C. school was more of a farm environment, whereas
he sort of transposed it over to L.A.
Whereas when he went to Ojai, he was older, and I think he took buses there, and he probably remembered the route, but I doubt he had the experience of being in the car with his mother driving up there, but maybe.
But anyway,
do we know what Dick's? I mean, I know Dick had a car and drove and everything, but do we know if he was a good driver or a bad driver, or did he like?
Well, he almost killed Ronnie Davis,
driving?
so he couldn't have been that good of a driver, right?
Yeah,
to get booted.
He did a surprising amount of driving, but I doubt he was a good driver.
Yeah, he did almost.
I've been reading, I get the sense
Davis,
that he was nervous about driving.
But he also describes driving so well, like good driving, so well in this. I thought maybe like
that's true.
Braking on a curve and stuff like that. The stuff that you should do when you drive. So.
Well, I agree with you, Frank, and what you're talking about is the experience that he kind of used for his Wash 35 and Now Wait for Last Year, and his Washington experience. We do know that there were letters that he wrote to his mom, basically begging her to let him come home.
Right.
Like from Ojai. So he wasn't super stoked to be in Ojai.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, he had a very mixed experience. I got the impression he didn't get along with his classmates. He just didn't really have friends there.
Is that when he had the experience with the ROTC and stuff like that? I don't know what is.
No, the alleged ROTC was at Cal Berkeley, where he was there for a few months at most.
Right.
But he did though describe this school indirectly. He claimed he got sent to military school. This absolutely was not a military school, but it was during wartime. I actually found in a newspaper ad on this very recently. It was called California Preparatory School for Boys, and this was in 1942 when he went there. I found an ad from May, and this school was actually in Covina, I assume it's pronounced, in the LA County. And it actually moved to Ojai. It was moving in June. And the ad says, beautiful new site overlooking the Ojai Valley, far from all industrial targets. So this was this was actually a school that was relocated, I assume because parents were afraid to send their kids to boarding school in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And because there were
legitimate wartime paranoia. I mean,
yeah, and it wasn't totally paranoid. It was, Pearl Harbor had been attacked. They were suddenly at war. It just so happened that the decisive battle in the Pacific was in June of 1942. And from then, once everybody realized that, which took a while, the coast wasn't really threatened with bombing or invasions or anything. But
there was also the attack on LA in 1940 or 41. That supposed attack.
Yeah, but anyway, the
created that paranoia in LA.
Fears on the coast were very real in early 1942, and it's entirely possible that's why he ended up there. Mm-hmm. Maybe Dorothy didn't feel like he was safe in the Bay Area.
How old was he at that point?
It was 1942. I think he was 14. Like in 8th or 9th grade. He was 13.
So he was considerably older than Greg.
Yeah, he wrote his
absolutely.
He wrote Return to Lilliput, his submarine, his first attempt at that submarine novel while he was in Ohio as well too. His first attempt at, he was first trying to write when he was.
Yeah. So this was an existing boarding school, a college prep school, but in the ad it said grades 3 to 12, and there's one sentence in it. It says special mathematics courses to fit future Army and Navy applicant. So that's not all of it. It also just says college preparatory and general courses, and it emphasized some of the outdoor stuff. But I'm sure he got more exposure to military something than he was used to, and he probably didn't like it because. And during that era, any summer camp or anything like that, you'd have like this military organization because that's the only way they knew how to organize anything like that back then. It was like reveille and taps and all that kind of stuff. Until at least the hippie era, which I experienced going to a little bit of summer camp during the 70s when all the counselors would either be ex-hippies or like burned out Vietnam veterans. Everything had kind of changed by then. Yeah. But yeah, he probably got a taste of that and didn't like it. But I think that the school that he went to briefly, the boarding school he briefly went to in the DC area called Countryside School, I think was closer to what's represented in this novel. Just sort of
Lost Padres.
Yeah, it actually sounds fantastic. Like to go to a place where there's animals and nature and all that stuff to go to school.
Yeah, it was called Countryside School. It emphasized just kind of like outside and farms and everything. Whereas this Ojai school, from what I was able to dig up recently, it's, they moved there and they moved, I think, into an old boarding house. I don't think it was particularly set up well as a school because they hadn't, they were just opening it up. So
yeah,
I think you can't read too much into this being Dick's Ojai experience, except the hiking and the
name only
and the drive. He certainly experienced being in a vehicle of some sort, getting there and getting out of there probably more than once, but it wasn't going there every weekend.
Yeah, my one of the reasons that it resonated with me was Sutton quotes one of the letters that he sent home. I don't know how he got this letter, but it's one of the letters that Phil wrote where he was basically like, hey, can't I come home now? Like, this kind of sucks.
Most kids write those letters.
Yeah. Now.
Yeah. It's hard to judge that because the ones that he wrote might have been at his peak homesickness.
Yeah.
And the gaps when he wasn't really writing or his mom didn't save it all. Maybe he was doing fine. We don't really know. But
right. We don't.
I tend to agree he didn't really have a great time there.
Yeah, and one of the things, I mean, I know he had some affection for the fact that he started trying to write there, and I believe I read somewhere, I believe it's Ojai where he first learned to type, but I don't know if that's true.
Well, I think it was before that, because this goes
Yeah,
back to
everybody learned to
my
type.
Young Authors Club stuff.
Mhm.
That started in early 1942, or he was submitting stories in late 1941, and it already had several published. And then he had this break where he went off to this school, and he still submitted some things, but it was more like old stuff he had lying around.
Yeah.
And
And we
then he
know,
had a gap, and then he came back to Berkeley, and then his more mature later Young Authors Club works were submitted.
now, I believe I hear you on the could have been a wartime thing, but also Dorothy just possibly not wanting to deal with him for part of it. But I think the excuse was his asthma. And what we do know that the asthma is the reason why he's not in the 1947 Berkeley yearbook, which I had the same experience. I went to the Berkeley Library to find the yearbook before I found out that I could just look it up online. Uh, you know, but hey, I was there, and he wasn't in the yearbook partially because he didn't finish the year for a couple of different health reasons. But we know that this asthma thing was an on again, off again thing. So on page 17, when it talks about the adrenaline spray that Greg was dealing with, I think that was a little bit of personal experience as well. But, you know,
Yeah, I was going to ask about.
yeah, but Greg, I don't think Greg is a one-to-one, like, I don't think he's supposed to be.
I don't think there's any true analogs in this, but
No.
they're all hybrids of some sort.
Well,
Well, Rickman talks a lot about his swallowing problems.
Yeah.
I think Greg in the story is young Philip K. Dick, but he's not a major player in the novel, so you can only get so much out of that. And I think the more interesting question as well is, who does Virginia represent? How much of his mother
is that
in
his
that?
mother, or is that one of his wives, or
Yeah, because
or both?
The biographers, I think both are saying, oh yeah, this is kind of a portrait of Dorothy, and others have said that. I'm not really convinced. I feel like Virginia's mother, Mrs. Adams or whatever she was,
Right.
she seems more like this bitter old woman.
Mrs. Watson.
The way Mrs. Watson, the way I picture Dick's mother, but I don't have a really good idea.
According to that first scene, I mean, I could see how that would be a representation of his mother in some form.
Yes.
And here and there, she has those features of like not really caring about her child as informed by other characters. But maybe that was referring to his mother, but not like not overall in the character.
Definitely the beginning, just when they're the only people in the story so far, pretty much Virginia and Greg. I can certainly see that being his relationship with his mother.
But
maybe,
do you think
maybe in the DC era
later she represents one of his wives?
I don't know.
A combination of wives?
I think it's entirely possible it's like the wife of someone else he knew. Someone we don't know about it. I just don't see Dick.
I have a theory on that. And if you look at the timeline,
familiar. I mean, that's sort of what struck me, is that she seemed like a totally different type of person than he's written.
Yeah, and I don't think it's Cleo, and I don't think it's Jeanette, and this was all before the last three wives. So
that's what I was about to say. Is this is during the marriage to Cleo, which was his longest marriage. A lot of people forget that Cleo was the one he was married to the longest, and so he wrote this, and it makes me wonder if the additional pages were not written later. Because I was thinking about this when he was kind of going through the machinations of if this happens and we have to get a divorce, we'd have to do this or that. he hadn't gone through a serious divorce. He had had one divorce, but he hadn't gone through one like the one he went through with Cleo, or certainly the one he went through with Anne.
Now that's the
I guess
Cleo
the
and
one
Anne
was
are the
intense
crap
too.
artist women, right? It's Cleo and Anne.
Yeah, he was just starting the relationship with Anne when he wrote Crap Artist.
So that's when he screwed over Cleo, basically.
Yes.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah,
And
Crap
then-
Artist is pretty much about his early life with Anne.
Yeah.
Thinly fictionalized.
Yeah, and so I wondered if a little bit of this, and that's where I come up with the mommy daddy issues thing, is that I did wonder if he wasn't kind of trying to explore what happened between Edgar and Dorothy a little bit in this novel. I think that's more plausible than
It does seem like there's a parental vibe to it. You know?
Totally. Here's what I think about all the women in the book. Aren't they all, at least in terms of Roger's perspective, they're all aggressively, and only for Roger, toxically matriarchal, right?
Yeah.
Wife isn't a spousal, right? The only person that's not is Liz. Everybody calls her dumb throughout the whole book.
Yeah.
Not just Roger, until Roger at the end comes to the conclusion that she is, quote, the ultimate being, unquote.
But yeah.
Which is to say, it's like it's desire, right? He wants to be.
But
with
we've
Liz.
all
He can't
done
get away
we've all
from
done
these
that with someone, haven't we? Like
What's
at
that?
some point been like, oh my God, she's so amazing, or he's so amazing. Like this is the ultimate person.
Yeah, but
They're so unbelievable. And then you realize, oh wait, they're a human.
for me, the subtext is.
But he doesn't get to the human
Yes.
part.
But it's also Liz is the escape that he can't have from matriarchy, from
Right.
people from like Virginia, and if
But
you
as-
will, Dorothy.
As Virginia says, she's also like the archetype that he goes back to all the time. This is his this is his escape, is this type of woman that has
Yes.
this certain personality, this sort of ditzy, but he regards her as smart. And
But inevitably, it's short-lived. He can't have it forever.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, exactly.
It's unobtainable. Yeah.
So on page 54, they meet and they have this kind of meet cute where he's like, hey, I'm going to California, right? And
I love
think-
that. I love that part of the book.
Yeah, and I thought this was a neat part. And I thought the way that he kind of goes back after we've already seen a little bit of their tension shows how, and it's funny.
I like that we see everything through Elizabeth's eyes.
Are you-
in that
You mean
that
Ginny?
past. In the
Virginia.
past. When
Yeah.
we go to the past in their dating era is all through her
Virginia.
eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he has this whole thing where he tells the story about the war, and then she says that's a lie. I think since we all kind of like break down a little bit about how Phil like kind of aggrandizes every little thing,
He's a liar.
like that he tells the
He's a
stories.
known liar.
He's a known exaggerator of events, and so
Sure, let's go with the exaggerate.
yeah. And so I kind of thought the scene was interesting for that, but it also kind of sets up and it plays to what you were talking about, Professor Wilson, which is that the matriarchy of it, because they kind of like each other and it's kind of cute, but there's a degree that it's like the way that they got kind of set up was like mom was never like, well, is he going to go to California or isn't he? And then it's almost like an arranged kind of situation where it's like, I don't know how romantic it really was.
It was it's all adversarial.
Yeah.
Even though their first meeting is an adversarial interaction where he takes her wine, and leaves the party. That's their first interaction, and she doesn't like him. And then he shows up where she is in this car and is like, "Hey, I could give you a ride."
Right.
Yeah,
And then it's uncomfortable. Then they get comfortable for a second, and then they piss each other off again. I mean, it's basically constantly adversary.
Yeah, and he's also at the time he's trying to escape a wife and child he already had.
Mhm.
I thought that was a big part of the context. And then he pretty much repeats the whole thing in California.
Well, he does, yeah,
He's
in the
looking for
most
someone else.
shallow way he could possibly do it.
Yeah, and he's got these family issues that are never resolved. I thought it was more that, I mean, I definitely agree to some extent. He had matriarch issues, but he also just had issues with family life
Or
and
interactions of any kind he seemed to have problems with, even with the guys he calls the good guys, you know?
yeah.
It's all sort of, when he has that argument with his guy that does the fixing, whatever he's called, the
repairman
engineer or whatever, down in the basement, and they go to the bar and they end up having an argument about sex and stuff like that. It's all adversarial.
Yeah.
See, that's why I like the ending, the extended ending, because you remember in The Man Whose Teeth Were All Exactly Alike, we were talking about how there's no kind of escape from the horror of this suburban, hoo-ha.
Mm-hmm.
The whole book, Roger's trying to get away. He's trying to negotiate things. He's trying to mitigate things. Everything is a failed effort on his part to obtain, happiness or whatever.
But he also fights against that happiness constantly as
totally,
well.
and is always sort of undermining himself.
Right.
And he does find a way out. What's the way out? Abandon everything.
Yeah.
Steal, and steal from these people I've been trying to negotiate, and just get out. That's the solution, I guess.
I love the scene with the mother-in-law when he's talking about, when she's like, "Hey, you listen to me. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to do this. I'm thinking about giving you money to do this thing." She doesn't say that outright, and then he immediately flies off the handle.
Oh, yeah.
And then cries in happiness after she's gone.
And kicks her out of the car on the curb and leaves her there. Yeah,
and threatens to beat her up.
And then he goes in and he's thinking, "Oh, this is great. We're going to get the money. My problems are solved." That was really bizarre. Nonetheless, it rang true. It was like, this is a real character.
And the characters are constantly shifting on a dime. It's like, they feel one way and at one moment, and the next moment it's the antithesis. Yeah.
Do any of you have a understanding of what was going on with his his dead or not dead brother? That felt like Dick was setting up some big reveal about what his actual history was, and it never happened.
I noticed that though, Roger. Absolutely.
Partially, I think what he's explaining there is that it ruined him for intimacy, on all levels. Is that he had this intimate relationship with his brother, where they were so close and then that was taken away from him. So therefore, he can't have that same sort of honest intimacy with anybody else. That's about all I got from it.
I just called Frank Roger, by the way. Sorry.
That's okay.
No problem, David W. David W.
Well, I do want to point out the divorce math scene, because I think it's really funny. On page 220 of the Gallants. And by the way, the Gallants says science fiction on the cover, which is weird. I didn't notice that. I didn't notice that until just.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it does say science fiction.
Yeah. Okay, so he says on page 220, because after all, there was one serious place to take it, and that was straight to the courts for a divorce or two. And then after a year of, I don't know that word,
interlocution? What is it?
Degrees, a remarriage, he and Liz Bonner, or rather Liz Lindahl. How many children? He asked himself. She would probably keep the two boys. No, he thought, not if the divorce was by Chick. Not if she was divorced on the grounds of adultery. And Virginia, in any case, would keep Greg. So at best, he would wind up with Liz and her two boys, and he would lose Greg, and he might find that Jerry and Walter were no substitute, even Jerry and Walter and Liz together. because Jerry and Walter were insufferable shithead kids, right?
weighing the pros and cons.
Yeah, weighing the pros and cons of divorce. I'm more interested in this because the Jeanette marriage was really very quick and over very quick. It wasn't, and he never had children with Cleo, so that was a thing. But it's funny for him to be writing about the math divorce before he ended up making that equation in really brutal ways 3 times later. Because
I've always said that Dick confused lust with love, and that's why he got married so many times. Is he would lust after a person, mistake that for love, and then in order to make that love legitimate, he would marry. That was his MO. And he explains what doing that in this book. He pretty much wants to do it. He does it once, and then he wants to do it again.
Well, and he would have married.
Use lust as an excuse for marriage.
Did he ever discuss that in any detail in interviews? I haven't read him speak.
I don't think he would ever be that honest with himself in an interview.
Well, and we know.
Have you listened to his interviews?
Well, yeah.
He says nonsense constantly in his interviews.
So, and we know that he also asked Grania Davis to marry him. He asked Doris to marry him. He asked.
Yeah. These were just the marriages the 5 are just the marriages that happened.
Joan Simpson, and believe me, I at Riverside, I saw the letter where he counted the 33 times he had her number on his phone bill in 1 month, which is not something you want to point out to someone in a letter, but he did. So that was actually the most disturbing thing I read in Riverside.
Well, he's wildly and weirdly free with information in his letters. They're wonderful to read. Yeah.
Well, yeah, one of the letters he literally says like, "Oh, I counted and I called you 33 times on my last phone bill."
I broke up with a girl for calling me 4 times in one day.
Well, yeah.
She must have liked you.
I told her, "Don't call me 4 times in one day," and she did.
Did you owe her money?
No.
All right. So, as fascinating as that line of questioning is, I'm going to move on. So, do we have anything else on mom, dad, Dorothy issues? I agree that
the whole book.
I would agree that the Dorothy thing is stronger early. That Virginia is not a 1-to-1 for Dorothy. It's not anything like that. But I do think that she was influenced by Dorothy also in the sense that Dorothy was obviously a very strong character she was a very strong woman who took care of business and got things done and worked and was single for a long time in an era where, women were kind of forced into these boxes to
Well, look at the way he describes, or Chick describes sex. Women aren't even supposed to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And Liz says there's a thing that women have that I think it's a bone. That's where I think it starts with an S or a C.
Yeah,
that we're supposed to get enjoyment from on the outside. Not sure what that.
That was a painful scene to read for a couple reasons, but mostly because as I'm sure.
Well, no, for the matriarchy,
a mythical clitoris.
For the matriarchy that Roger struggles with, there's of course the on the opposite side of things, his patriarchy and Chick's patriarchy and the absurdism of it, and that's one manifestation of it, for sure. Yeah,
I found that stuff hilarious. Like everything they say about sex, he says about sex in the book is just off the wall crazy as far as I'm concerned. And it might have been part of that era, but I think it's beyond just that era. It's him mocking that sort of puritanical American view of sex.
Little man and big idea.
While he's also indulging in the same sort of, puritanical viewpoints.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, that is a huge part of the book, but it's not the only part of the book. I thought the TV shop and the world building around the TV shop was super fascinating. I don't know if does anybody else feel the same way as I do about that. You don't, Larry. Um, well, okay, listen.
I don't know. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Okay, so he does a lot of background as to how the TV shop operates. And there's a lot of details about the sales of television in this era. And it's something that Dick would know a lot about because art music in Berkeley was one of the first stores in Berkeley to sell TVs. And so Phil was selling TVs at art music. I don't think it was his specialty. And I kind of have this funny image in my head of like somebody coming in and like, can you tell me about this TV? I'm like, can I tell you about these opera records? Right? It's like, I can't see Phil, but he does know a little bit about it.
I am going to tell this story again. I have a friend who he's a theater guy, a director, an actor, good actor, but he wasn't making enough money working in theater, so he had to get a day job, and he got a job at Home Depot. And they put him in the carpet department. They said, "Do you know anything about carpet?" He said, "Yeah, of course I do." But he didn't know anything about carpet in any way, shape, or form. And so whenever anybody comes into the carpet department, they also don't know anything about carpet. So the only question they ever asked was, "Is this Berber?" And so any carpet they asked, "Is this Berber?" He would say, "Oh yeah, this is Berber carpet." Yep. And that's the only way. And he sold carpet all the time by just lying to everyone about what he knew.
Well, it's kind of like when I worked in the plumbing and the the bath and plumbing department at Heckinger's in college, and I didn't know anything, but I got really good because they told me that we got a commission for every Kohler toilet that we sold. So I got really knowledgeable about Kohler toilets. The Cadillac of toilets.
Just that one toilet.
But yeah, so I don't know how much Phil knew about selling TVs, but I like all this stuff. And on page 58, and there's a setup and payoff coming up here too with this, is propped up against among his boxes, Roger Lindahl carried on a conversation about something. She listened. It had to do with television. This is him talking to Jenny, right? And then he said, in the post-war world, television was going to be a giant industry, and Roger had involved himself in television, electronic engineering, and design. A buddy of his, unnamed, had designed a scanner with more lines or fewer. She could not follow the discourse because it poured out of them so fast, the words trying to appear at once. So like this whole thing that he's like, yeah, I'm gonna get into this TV business and I'm gonna be selling TVs. Like that's the first scene where we get kind of like how this TV shop operates and all this stuff. Because I like this stuff because, of course, the mom and pop shops selling TVs were a thing of that era, and eventually now TVs are big business, and then you know, it's a light year of a difference from like you order one online from Best Buy or whatever and they have it delivered, or whatever. But I just liked this stuff about, because I felt like it was his skill as a world builder in science fiction he was putting to a great use here.
That's exactly what I was going to say. He does a good job of immersing, just like in his science fiction stuff. He does a good job of immersing readers in this world with using details to do it without, you know, there's constant, there's a lot of characters who kind of flow in and out of that arena, but we don't really get to know them. They're just part of that scene, you know, or world rather.
Right. And also he uses the world building with the apartment building, the post-war, and that's page 93. After a day or so, they found an apartment in the 6-unit wartime housing building in the village of identical buildings. And then there's the race issue involved with that. Only white people lived in the village, but a mile away on the side of a steam laundry and a supermarket was a second village for Negroes set up just like theirs. So that is world building about the era and things that you might not think about that now make it feel like a period piece, whereas it was taking place maybe 5 years later when he was writing this.
Yeah, I think this is really the strongest part, or definitely one of the strongest parts of his mainstream novels, is his understanding of these Main Street businesses and the different types of people who inhabited them. This is what he lived through. He knew the difference of the personalities of the entrepreneurs and the salesmen and the repair people. And that's all in this book, but it's also in other mainstream novels. And certainly in particular, he had lived through the wartime. It wasn't just music, it was radios that were sold through these shops, and they couldn't get new radios to sell, so it was all about repairs and keeping them going. But then once the war was over, he lived through it. He knew how everything was changing, and it was all about bringing in all the new stuff and selling it. And this is, although it's not emphasized, this is specifically set in like 1952, 53. And that was right around the point where he quit his day job and didn't experience it anymore. But he was right there at the beginning. And as a teen, he was kind of a geeky hobbyist sort of person. He tried to understand radio, and he was doing stuff by himself. And I think he can identify with at the end in one of the coda paragraphs or the chapters where Roger's trying to invent this antenna that'll tune in the TV based on whatever. If he wasn't that himself, he was certainly among people who were dealing with this technology and trying to understand it, just to be competent to repair the equipment.
Well, and also what might be missed is that he's prescient here, because color TVs weren't popular. There was a color TV or two in the era he's talking about, but it wasn't until the late 60s, early 70s that color television became dominant. And so if he's writing this in the 50s, saying that color TV is the future is prescient. Yeah, and it might be a popular view, but it was still...
He still might have been writing it a bit as a period piece that, well, back in 1953, that's what the entrepreneurs were thinking. It's like, we got to get bigger, we got to get more capitalized because these bigger, fancier TVs are harder to service or more of an investment. I think he was just, across the board, he was keenly aware of all that stuff, and he wrote about it. He eventually wasn't getting much new information along these lines, but everything about small businesses that he put in.
Well, if he was still, he still could have been reading the brochures, like he says in the book, reading that kind of stuff in the magazines, and who knows.
Yeah, but everything he put into his science fiction about these small business figures, the Herb Hollis figures, he got the same kind of stuff from that era. And he didn't, I always felt like he didn't really understand how large organizations were. It's like when he portrayed a corporation, it was, well, there was this big boss and you just sort of barged in and had a talk with him. He didn't understand how something with thousands of people really would work.
And Herb Hollis, for people who don't know, was the owner of Art Music. So, and look, listen, I think you're right, Frank. Like, that's Philip K. Dick in a nutshell, is like, whereas here it's like TV repairman or whatever, and our friends from Frolic say he makes up, tire regroovers and ceramic pot healers, and in a science fictional context,
tire regrooving was a real thing. How many times do I have to tell you this?
I know, but
he didn't make it up.
Well, I'm just saying, in the context of that novel, it was some it was for we had the jalopies and the Mars jalopies and simulacra and on and on and on. He was known for this, and this novel is no different in that regard. Now, the setup and payoff that he sets up here, on 104, he has the scene where Roger does his pitch, and this is the scene you were talking about, Larry, with there won't be any television in another 10 years. Oh no, Roger said. That's where you're wrong. There'll be television. There's going to be television inside 1 year. I read all the trade journals. I know it's the truth. This time next year, you're going to have as big a television inventory as anything else put out there. That's a fact. I'm not making this up. And he gets himself into the shot by making this pitch. And then you see him like turn a deaf ear to Chick Bonner trying to make the same pitch. And
Right.
so the setup and the payoff of like,
Yeah, but that's because he wants to fuck his wife.
well, yeah, there's that.
Totally
But,
different reasoning.
Yeah, that part was brilliant because they were all kind of talking and thinking past each other. They were all just completely on different wavelengths.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And
The men are
really portrayed
constantly
that really well.
they're jockeying for position constantly. There's no end to it. Whereas, I don't know, that like Virginia and Liz are just trying to hang on often and deal with these little men.
Yeah. And their big egos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, then Virginia has the big turnaround basically, where she's just
Yeah, she has
disgusted
the
with him.
swimming with sharks moment. I don't know if any of you have seen that movie, but they're doing a TV show now. It's a movie about a
Kevin Spacey?
Kevin Spacey
Yeah.
and Frank Whaley. Frank Whaley is he's like an intern or something at this big movie studio, and he kidnaps his boss
That's
and basically holds him for ransom until his boss says, "Hey, this is a spoiler, just so you know. I don't care about that stuff, but fuck you." So he holds
Hey,
his
whoa,
boss
don't tell
captive
me, man.
and he's threatening to kill his boss. He's like, "There's no reason I shouldn't just kill you because you're a dick." And Kevin Spacey's character says, "Hey, what about this? What about if I make you one of the execs, and then you don't kill me, I don't mention this, and everybody's happy." And so he becomes an executive at the end of it. It's basically what happens in this book is the same sort of thing. She jockeys her position into a position of power. It's really, I love that part.
Let me take that one step further vis-a-vis our matriarchal conversation.
Right.
She takes on the role of a man at the end. She moves from a female role of inevitable. I don't know if subservience is the right word.
No, that's the right word.
Okay.
The
like
way
you
he
say,
portrays it, it's the
yeah. Although she's strong in her own right, but still subservient, inevitably.
Mhm.
But then she becomes, like you say, she rises to this position of power and takes it for herself, like a man, right?
Well, I think it's more that this is kind of a reading it, from the standards of our own time. But I see it more as she becomes a feminist and she just asserts her agency, or whatever the terminology would be. She just kind of realized this guy's a jerk and she's in this bad situation, and she just outsmarts him.
She doesn't see. The thing is, she has two goals. She wants to exert her power, but she also wants to maintain this marriage because she doesn't want to be left behind as a divorcee or whatever that might entail to her, something bad. So she manages to do everything she wants. And of course, we all know that women hate sex anyway, according to Bill Gates' Dick. So losing the sex part doesn't bother her at all. It's just wanting the power and wanting the marriage at the same time. She gets everything she wants.
Yeah, and
which is why she's the evil bitch in the.
And I think that's more than her just taking the role of the man. She's just making the best of her situation as a woman. And I think she was in the right. We're all talking about Roger. He's just a complete jerk. And
I mean, that's my opinion.
Why wouldn't she do these things?
Absolutely. It's not a critique, but of course, with feminism, it's even if you just read sort of feminist theory and criticism and its evolution. I mean, often what is discussed is how does a woman find an authentic space and, as you say, agency in the world of men? is it even possible? One way to do that is to adopt symbolically. I should have said symbolically the role of the male. No, it's a positive thing. It makes her. We were talking about. I think it was the last book, the teeth book. I'm not going to try to say the whole title. And the notion of strong women and how it's constantly problematized, not just by Philip K. Dick, but just in general in terms of the feminist project, I guess. Yeah, just to clarify.
Well, and think about the criticism that Ursula Le Guin laid down on Phil, that he didn't write women characters, so then he made Angel Archer the protagonist of Timothy Archer. But I'm wondering, is Virginia one of the better, stronger female characters?
Well, that's the thing. It seems like in these straight novels, his female characters have much more agency and are written way better than they are in his science fiction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even when they don't achieve their goals entirely, like in Teeth, they don't achieve their goals entirely. They actually eke out some kind of victory, whether it's being able to not have a kid or have a kid, or make sure you're an equal partner or somewhat equal partner. All those things are so much better than in the science fiction.
Isn't that interesting? It's interesting though, because I was going to say, well, no, there's still the transmigration of Timothy Archer, but that's a mainstream, isn't it, for them? It's obviously it has there's a book right there. It has something to do with the science fiction. I have a theory on that, but we don't.
But she has agency in that, at least. I mean, she's not the best character, but she's. I mean, I hated
Well, Phil certainly thought she was. He thought she was so much smarter than him, and all that.
Yeah.
That he said.
Yeah. Well, when I reread this Puttering a few years ago, really for the first time, I'm pretty sure since the 80s when I first read it, my big takeaway was that Virginia Lindahl was seemingly inadvertently, that was like a feminist masterpiece that he'd done. Like his great hero, and it's certainly more than Angel Archer. Angel Archer is just, to me, just a thinly disguised Philip K. Dick stand-in. There's nothing really feminine about her. But here it seemed like, perhaps inadvertently, he had created this great character who just triumphs in the end. Now the question is, where did he intend the novel to end? Where do you end it? Like if you ended after chapter 21, she's clearly the hero. It's like she triumphs in the end and beats this jerk. But then there's the 22. Chapter 22 where. But the whole,
and she's vilified again as the
title Puttering About in a Small Land, that comes from her, Virginia's, inner monologue, just viewing him with scorn, etc. He's just this guy puttering about when he should be more
succeeding. Yeah.
But if
page
if
206, he said that. Yeah. Well, and so my question is Virginia his best or strongest female character? So far, I would say yes. And I see what you're saying, Frank, that it takes away some of the victory of her that Liz and Roger get together, but really, no, because I don't know, because...
What do you mean? I mean, they clearly state her as the villain in that last chapter.
Well, but what I'm saying is that I still think she kind of got what she wanted, and she's kind of having her victory in the sense of that she's running the store and doing her own thing and taking care of it.
Sure, the character, but we the audience are told that she's the villain.
Yeah,
but isn't that because Roger comes off real bad at the end?
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
And I will tell you, I know you like that ending, Professor Wilson, but I will say I'm with Larry. I don't like that ending because
I think he likes it because it's problematic and
that's correct
and horrifying.
That's right. Well, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that Miss Alt would suddenly be like, I'm gonna help you guys have an
Here's your sex room.
Yeah, I don't think she would do that. It doesn't make a lick of sense. I don't think people at the school would be like rooting for them.
That was weird as well.
Yeah, I don't see that.
Everybody at the school was in on it all of a sudden.
Yeah, that didn't make a lick of sense to me, and also I thought it kind of took away some of the power of the rest of the book, because it was like, I think Virginia kind of winning outright was a better ending.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is it's kind of against the Philip K. Dick I know he wasn't totally writing in the formula yet, but part of the formula is that you end on a humane note.
The fucking formula.
And you shut up.
The humane note was he's this guy who's trodden upon by these evil women.
It's true. And
he's still got his spirit left, and he's clever. He's gonna make his way to Chicago and start over. He's the mundane hero of the story. As far as Dick was concerned.
For me, it was like Virginia's free of this loser, and the loser's going away.
Nice.
You know what I mean?
See, but by the way, Frank, you just saw one of the funny dynamics of this is I'm fucking teaching a class on the formula, and Larry thinks it's complete bullshit.
I think it's nonsense.
It's just one of the funny things about, and it's funny too, because you guys didn't see.
He wrote a paragraph to some fanboy, and David takes it as religion.
Well, but here's the thing. It was funny because the other day in Gil's class, Tim Powers, who had obviously never heard of the formula letter, towards the end was like, formula?
Maybe it was satirical, yeah.
Yeah. He was like, it's got to be satirical. And we're like, he actually wrote a letter. And so it's funny because I know the people who call bullshit on it, and I actually am super okay with that. It's part of the fun of teaching it is like the debate of whether it's real or not. And, I mean, that's part of Dick's mystique in general, is what's true and what's false about what he says and what he does. Yeah.
Yes.
And one of the things that you could say, oh, the formula is bullshit, but I also just used it to write a book, right? So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's funny.
Well, no,
I thought that was hilarious. When Tim Powers said that, I was cracking up. I really was.
I bet you were.
And that's why, too, when you said it just now, the fucking formula,
whatever Phil K. or Phil Dick thought about it, I mean, you can plug a lot of his stuff into it.
Yeah, not everything, but you can plug a lot into it.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't murderboard 30 books for nothing.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to your lecture on it. I'm undecided on it. I think it probably is a framework he worked on to build up.
Came up with after the fact.
After the fact, that's right. It's intuitive. It's mostly intuitive. It's like things that and I've said this, that he never meant for some jackass in San Diego to teach it 40 years later.
Yeah. Right. Like his early chapters, he'll do this, he'll do that, and he kind of knows what he has to do at the end. But I always thought, well, once he got a novel launched, he was pretty much improvising and all the middle stuff. And I think that's fairly consistent with the formula. He's kind of there's a lot of hand waving as like what's going to happen in the middle.
Dangling characters and
I address all that.
But anyway, I'm looking forward to the lecture, which is 2 days from when 2 days from when we're recording. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, and so what's funny is and that's why I bring up the Humane Act, because like he does look for these things that it's intuitive. So, and if you see like he introduces Virginia in the first chapter and Roger in the second chapter, it's like he plays those two roles, because in the sense of where it fits the formula is she doesn't really have the power in the situation, but she's trying to get Greg into the school, and the power of the situation in the second chapter with Roger, I don't think he does this on purpose. I think it's intuitive, and like he sets these things up that way, and I think that's that's part of it. Now, I do want to bring up the race and gender issues. The on page 109, the whole race issues with almost race riot. We're almost done through this book, but like that was a kind of headachy part for this book for me.
I thought it was amazing. I thought he told it like it should be told. Like,
I'm not saying bad headachy. I'm just saying like hard to read.
I mean, he writes his Roger character as just this jerk and I don't know if most people wouldn't understand this, but there comes a time when you're a jerk, or you feel like you're a jerk, when you feel like you need to be punched in the face. And I've felt like that many times. I've started fights that I knew I was going to lose.
With me.
But there are times when me and this other guy had this philosophy, and totally separate. But the philosophy was, once you get someone in a fight, you've already won. Because the goal isn't to win the fight. The goal is to get the fight started. And once the fists are flying, you've already won. Now, the consequences he suffers from that fight were, I think, a lot more extreme than Roger expected.
Well, it's kind of like live action trolling.
Yeah, it is. It's like live action trolling.
It's like a troll looks like an idiot, but they got what they wanted.
Yes, they achieved their goal.
Yeah.
And but the race riot part, we've seen that happen. We've seen videos, like recent videos, like that one on the dock or whatever it was, on the boardwalk.
Oh, yeah.
Where there's this guy fucks with this black guy. The black guy, like, guy, leave me alone. And then the fight starts, and all these white guys come in and say, "What's this black guy doing to you?"
Are you talking about the Alabama thing on the dock, right?
Yeah, I don't know where it happened, but
it was Alabama. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And Dick wrote this, 60 years ago. The same thing happening.
What was it? Do you guys think he was trying to? Because it seems as if he
70 years.
At first he's harping on race, and sort of injecting it into the narrative in various ways, and then by the time we get to the end, it's not really. It slowly kind of dissolves throughout the course of the novel. Is he part? And I didn't get.
Well, actually, he apologizes for it in the novel by having Roger pick up the immigrant workers.
Right. Now, is he trying to demonstrate growth on Roger's part? Because if he is, Roger completely fucks it up at the end when he leaves everybody.
I think he's trying to show that Liz was a better person than we give her credit for.
Yeah, I agree with that. It definitely was an attempt to show growth, and I think the fight was mostly just a plot device to make sure he had a setback, but it was also showing that he was at fault, and he was a racist, and definitely the author's viewpoint was anti-racism. Whether
he immediately showed that he was racist when he's called it OJ instead of Ojai over and over again until Liz corrects him. Right? He called it right. And even when she corrects him finally, and she says, "Oh, hi," he says, "All right, fine, fuck it, whatever."
Yeah, that seemed to be treated as Liz was the only one who was pronouncing it correctly, as if that was kind of a flaky new idea. And so I was a little unsure, how did people actually pronounce it back then? Because
I think everyone was pronouncing it Ojai, and I took it as everyone was pronouncing it Ojai, and he was the only one calling it OJ.
Yeah, I took it the other way, that everybody must have been pronouncing it OJ, and that she was the one looked at as a flake because she was trying to get them to say Ojai, but I could be wrong about that. It would have helped if Dick had had somebody pronounce it phonetically at some point, so we knew how they were pronouncing it
at that late period.
Yeah. I know when I was first
at
reading
one
it.
point at the beginning. I can't remember by who. It might be by Virginia.
Yeah, when I'm almost sure when I was first reading it in the 80s, I didn't know it was Ojai, and and I probably misunderstood what was going on with that.
Ojai or whatever. Yeah.
Right. But me being a Southern Californian, born and raised, I get that all the time. Like La Jolla is La Jolla to a lot of people.
Yeah. And Dick lived in Point Reyes Station, and I think that's the way that people pronounce it there. But the Spanish, there's probably a movement to try to say, oh, well, you really should pronounce it Point Reyes. But I certainly have no idea how people pronounce Ojai back in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
All right. So before we get into our general thoughts and reviews, are there any other themes that I missed, like overall themes? Does any one of the three of you have anything that I missed?
Well, I do have some terrible writing.
Oh,
Somebody want to tell me what this line is supposed to be?
Okay.
A platter of white squares like small red bricks. This is when Liz makes bad cookies, but he describes it as a platter of white squares like small red bricks.
Interesting. So if you take away the red brick makes me think of course, the rectangular brick and I don't know, a round brown, well, not a brownstone, but in a house. Too many colors.
Which is interesting because I think some of the, especially the first chapter, some of the descriptions of the freeway and stuff is really great writing. Like there's some
but there's these lines in there. This is only an example. There's other lines similar to this, but not nearly as blatant.
I think you know what? I didn't note it for the. I didn't note it.
The reason I bring that up is that
the podcast, but there were a couple of lines that I had that I thought like that, and also Virginia making herself a dish of cottage cheese and canned pears. Made me want to puke.
For some reason, I thought of you when she did that.
I was
like, David's gonna say something about cottage cheese, and I'm gonna have to say, what does a vegan know about cottage cheese?
Yeah. Well, I literally wrote yuck with my highlighter on the page.
Goddamn vegans.
But yeah,
but
I do think
that was actually a pretty popular snack for a long time, at least in the 60s. The reason I wrote that down was that he uses so many obvious literary devices in this. And I was going to say, is this just because he's in his early writing, or is it because it's a straight novel and he's trying to use devices to make it more literary?
Probably both.
Well, and plus we don't know because that, like, also with the literary novels, I'm sure they did not take a hand to the editing in a way posthumously that it might have happened if he was given a chance to do another draft.
Humously? Is that what he?
Humously, whatever.
Post humor after
humor.
After the laugh.
After laughter. Yeah. So I mean, after his death, they're not gonna fuck around with the text as much as like he probably would have if he had gotten another chance to make a pass on it.
Well, so, do you think those literary devices came from the editing process? You know, like, is that something that would happen? Like Frank said about the fight between the black guys being a device to hold him, back or give him an obstacle.
Yeah, I don't know, but I have a feeling that, if you're the press that's editing this for the 1985 edition or whatever, you're not really going to be like, okay, this description of cookies is weird because you don't have anybody to go like, hey, Phil, can you change this?
Yeah, but I'm not talking about 1985.
I know, but I'm talking about how this ends up in the final book is what I'm saying, like as being kind of weird. But then again, he signed off on Boob Mountain in Cosmic Puppets.
Right, in Cosmic Puppets.
So who knows,
I just thought it was interesting that he used like blatant devices that he doesn't really use in a lot of his other writing.
Yeah, I think it's probably the case he was deliberately trying to use mainstream literary techniques, and so that's the market he was aiming for. And I do think the writing is uneven. there are editing issues in the publication of it, but they just had that one type script to work from. The one scene I really want to point out is when he's done with the dentist and he has Roger. He just has this rant about corruption and
that was some great writing, wasn't it?
It's like he had a vision of crooks, swindles of every kind. He saw up into the office buildings and the crooked activity going on, the wheels, the machinery, and it just goes on and on and on. A very long.
It gets
paragraph.
worse and worse as it goes.
Yeah,
it's like a total panic attack.
And it culminates in a really racist rhetoric. But I know exactly
that's part of his character. Yeah,
right.
I thought it was just very effective.
It's it's as if that made me think of some of William S. Burroughs' writing. It's just sort of deployed in there like a little bomb. Yeah.
But this is, I mean, Roger definitely has anxiety, like classic anxiety.
Yeah.
Clinical anxiety.
Yeah. Well, so did Dick. But also I thought there was, Liz was kind of the least effective of the four as far as being portrayed. She was pretty much an airhead, but he did do some good things in the write-up of her interior, monologues to such an extent where he kind of got a sense of, well, maybe she's scatterbrained in this way because of this and that. At least he made an attempt.
Specific way of looking at things that you sort of understand.
Yeah, because when you were just hearing her voice, she just kind of sounded ridiculous. I was like, oh, well, she's the one everybody's making fun of, and they're right. But when he got in her head a little bit, I kept
thinking of Suzanne Summers and Three's Company.
Yeah. When he got in her head a little bit, I was kind of getting it a little bit. There wasn't enough there to really put it over the top where I felt like she was a good character, but he had some, I thought had some good attempts at least.
So my mom is a lot like this character, but she is actually a smart person, just doesn't know how to voice it, how to make herself seem smart when she speaks. But
I like Lois. Come on.
Yeah, I love her. She's my mom.
Yes, I know.
But she, she's at her advanced age. She's given up on trying, so she doesn't even try to sound intelligent in any way. She's just basically like, fuck it. You know what? I'm just gonna say whatever is at the top of my head, and that's what I'm gonna say. And if nobody likes it, I don't care. That's become her MO. But for years, she was upset about when she was a kid, no one took her seriously. Just like Liz. Like, she speaks a certain way that people don't quite understand, so they immediately write her off as stupid, right? But it's also, she has that inner monologue that has a point, that there's a brain there. It just doesn't know how to voice itself. And I identified with Liz quite a bit.
And she's she's capable too. I mean, cognitively, imaginatively. That, if I'm not mistaken, aren't there passages where there are like almost stream of consciousness passages where, for instance, she's trying to empathize or get into the mind of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I think. I mean, she's not obviously. She's mentioned as being dumb on several occasions, which that alone should just make you think, well, of course she's not dumb. She's more than
yeah, right. The more they say she's dumb, there has to be something to it, right?
Absolutely. Right.
Well, what if I say something? What if I accidentally, tell the whole thing? But yeah, she's an interesting character.
Frank says, she's not given the redemptive sort of value that everyone else is given.
The worst writing.
It gets a business. Virginia gets the business. Roger gets to go about it his own way, which he wanted to. Liz is just sort of stuck there in Santa Barbara and getting her kid every once in a while.
The absolute worst writing in the book is the description of Liz's breasts where they're like dancing under her sweatshirt or something. It is absolutely the worst.
That's pretty common for PKD though.
I know it was pretty common for male writers of that era to like to graphically.
I don't know.
Yeah, as you know, it's very common in his books. I thought in this one, it wasn't as gratuitous as normal. There was kind of a reason for it more than normal. But yeah, it's embarrassing.
The language of sex, the language of sex is horrifying in this. There's the inside her, which is done several times. He uses intercourse and makes it sound dirty at one point. And then everything Chick says.
Oh, he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
But the puritanical sort of viewpoint of everyone in this is like women shouldn't enjoy sex, and why does she have a diaphragm? Does she have another one that she uses for her daytime diaphragm whenever she might have sex with anyone on the street and stuff like that? Is just so.
Well, that made
gnarly to me, like this pre-sexual revolution.
Yeah, language. Well, it makes it a good period piece. No pun intended.
And I think Dick was joking about it at the same time. Like that was his humor.
Yeah, I think it's really hard for us to get our frame of mind in that world and kind of understand where he was. But certainly, just like writing a novel like this, where there's all the birth control and adultery just being a big part of it, but not a real clear moral message about this is bad.
Yeah, like the when he's talking to Olsen.
It's hard to.
Roger's talking to Olsen in the bar. You have to cheat.
Right.
I mean, what are you going to do if you don't cheat?
Yeah, I thought the characterization was very effective in bringing out all these different viewpoints. But I'm not an expert in this period of time as far as what got published. But it seems to me if you weren't publishing it on the margins in a genre work, or if you weren't Hemingway or someone who'd have the clout to push the boundaries, it seems to me this would be a hard novel to get published in the 50s, but I could be wrong.
Well, 8 times rejected seems to prove your theory.
I just don't. I don't think it was a very well written novel compared to those other ones that did manage to make it to the mainstream through that had sex and stuff like that in it.
Yeah, and well, we still have the review and Dicklike Suggestions, but I would say here, I would say this theme of like how he writes about sex, at least it's better than The Man Whose Teeth Were All Exactly Alike. And by the way, I laughed earlier because I had the thought, because you just referred to it as teeth, and I had the thought next time I bring it up, I should just call it exactly. That's what made me laugh in my head. So if anyone's wondering why I just suddenly randomly laughed in the middle of Larry saying something earlier, that's because I had the thought that I should just call that novel exactly.
Just to make up for the times you didn't say it.
But anyways, on that note, maybe we should get into our review. I'm going to start us off with...
You started us off last time.
All right.
Let Big D do it.
All right.
Mine will be quick. I think I gave Teeth, or Exactly, 4 out of 5. I'm going to give this... I liked it a little better. I'm going to give this one 3.75 out of 5 airheaded ultimate beings as a work of compelling suburban absurdity and pathology in 1950s post-war America.
All right. I am going to give this... I like this one a lot. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 Ojai boarding schools because I think it is... I think it's the best of the realist novels I've read yet. I like it better than Crap Artist, which I know will will piss off the next person to talk. And I, I I don't know. It just worked for me. I found it compelling. I thought the opening was really good. The characters were great. I thought it has. I almost feel like, yeah, that last chapter might have dinged it a bit, and I do think the chapter 21 was valuable. And but it's interesting that that happened to it, and I also just think it's a good thing that we got to read it because this is one that I think has value and says stuff about Phil. Langhorne, and then we'll close out the reviews with Frank.
Let's see. I'm gonna give it. I gave Teeth two whatevers. This one's getting 2.5 insiders out of 5, and I will say I like this better than Teeth, but and it doesn't really compare. They're two very different stories, I think. And I give it the extra 0.5 because I hated Roger throughout this whole book, except for when he was young and didn't know where he wanted to be or what he wanted to do. I knew he was abandoning his wife and child, which he didn't get points for that. But his interaction with Virginia early on, when they were younger, was well done. The first chapter, like we've said, it was well done. There's stuff in here worth reading, but a lot of it is basically what the kids say, cringeworthy. It's
All right.
It's just bad. It's just bad at times.
Frank, your overall thoughts?
So I've got to do it on a scale of 1 to 5.
Or 1 to 1,000, whatever you want to do.
I'll give it.
You're not limited to our scale.
I'll give it 3 diaphragms because you need some extras. Yeah, I mean, 2 might not be enough in a pinch, so 3 out of 5. This is definitely my favorite of those mainstream novels that I read back in the 80s. I think Crap Artist is the only one that I compare it to as far as overall quality, but I'm not compared to choose one or the other at this point because I haven't read Crap Artist all the way through in a while, and it's kind of from a different period also. But I just think the characters are all pretty good in this. It's a great period piece. Overall, I'm pretty typical among Dick fans. I don't think the mainstream novels are all that great. I wouldn't be reading any of these more than once if I wasn't a big Dick fan. But this is one of my favorites for sure, and that's why I'm giving it a 3. But everything else almost would be 2s and 1s.
Even Transmigration?
Transmigration, I'd probably give that a 3. I like it. I don't think it holds up all that well, and all the stuff about Angel Archer being a female character, I don't buy at all. So that's a big distraction for me. I think
I mean, we did talk about that quite a bit in our episode.
Yeah, I tend to read these pieces, these novels, interested in how they connect to his biography more than anything else. I went through a long period where I didn't want to deal with the biographical stuff, but now since I've just totally absorbed it and kind of and I no longer forget like this wife was this wife and he lived here and there, I can just see it and everything. And now that I have, my goal now is to kind of go back and reread everything in light of that. But a novel like this, I think I'd be hard pressed if I wasn't a big Dick fan to say, oh, I need to read that again. It's more like, yeah, I enjoyed that at the time, but the opportunity cost of missing out on other things, I don't think I'd be getting into this. But if someone was new to the mainstream novels, I would definitely point to this one and say, yeah, give it a try, because it's not that hard to get into, and a lot of really solid material.
That's actually how I felt about the beginning. Was, I read 80 pages of this in the past week and a half, and I read the last 240 yesterday. So, I mean, it took, but I did enjoy those first 80 pages. Like I was like, oh, this is a decently built novel,
Yeah, I reread the whole thing really in the last 2 days, and some of it I was just reading through. I was like, oh yeah, that was good. I remember that. And then there were parts like, wow, that was really neat, because it's just a short bit that didn't leave a big impression on me, because I tend to forget everything, and there's plot points I didn't remember. And the whole thing about the ending, that's an interesting question, because I think clearly those last two chapters are kind of extra long epilogues that.
Well, I think they're antithetical as well.
Wait,
yeah.
Philip K. Dick writing
they
extra
oppose
long
each other.
epilogues that have nothing to do with the rest of the book?
Yeah,
No.
I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, is think about, well, what it would be like if you finished after chapter 20. It's kind of got the ending with the
put down.
The difference of opinion about the use of the diaphragm and the adultery in general, and between Roger and Virginia, and then in chapter 21, she's totally victorious, gets everything in her name, and
then we find out she's the worst woman ever in the next chapter.
She's the boss, and then okay, we're back to the guy who's puttering, and he's like, okay, he gets to still be with Liz once in a while, but that's still not a good enough life for him. He's going to try to start over again
in Chicago,
and he's clever enough. I thought it was funny in the chapter before that, there was the emphasis on, oh well, they use all these tags with multiple carbon layers or whatever it was, and this is like an anti-theft device, and he just completely goes in and defeats it. It's like he clears out the TVs, and he knows, all I got to do is steal these tags also. I'll get away with it, and he probably did.
All right. Anybody here think this should be a movie? Because I'm not.
I don't see why not.
I've got actors if you want them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who's playing who?
Well, first of all, now again, just think of these actors in terms of appropriate ages. Right now, none of them are probably the age they should be for these roles. But now the first one's obvious. Well, maybe not obvious, but Paul Giamatti should probably play a character in every one of Philip K. Dick's some kind. So I have him for Roger. Linda Fiorentino is Virginia from
Nice.
Jade, The Last Seduction and Dogma. She's since disappeared.
I think Roger needs to be a little bit more handsome. I'm not saying that I don't like Paul Giamatti, who is on our bucket list to get on the show. He's very handsome.
It does not escape me that the women I've chosen are much better looking than the men that I've chosen. You're gonna have to edit that out, because we got to get Paul on here. That don't. For Chick, I have Michael Stolberg. I don't know if that's how you say it. He was in A Serious Man. He was in one of the seasons of Fargo, The Shape of Water. He was in.
Okay, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, but especially from A Serious Man. For Liz Bonner, I got Haley Atwell from Captain America and Mission Impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Kate Blanchett is Edna Alt, and then Marion Watson, Judi Dench. With an American accent and the appropriate age.
I would put Alt as Judi Dench personally.
So I had her there first, but then I thought of Watson, Mrs. Watson. Yeah,
I do we didn't talk about Mrs. Watson enough. I really liked that character.
I did too. Yeah,
I thought she was a great mother-in-law.
Virginia, maybe like a young Jennifer Jason Leigh, like Hudson.
Jennifer Jason Leigh could play anything.
Yeah,
that's true.
She could even play the guy parts if she wanted to.
She was really amazing in this most recent season of Fargo, if anybody saw that. So
I did.
Marty saw it. She said it was great.
Yeah,
No, I don't
Larry,
know
you need to
why
watch that.
I got into it, but I started thinking of characters and then I just kind of wrote a bunch down. I don't know if it'd make a good movie, but
Yeah,
whatever.
I think it would make a good movie. I don't see why it wouldn't. I mean, you got people, and I mean, it's not going to be a tentpole Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
No, and if you did a period and it was about kind of and you had
You'd
like
have to soften some of the rougher edges, say.
yeah,
But
and then maybe try to add some like humor and like a Coen Brothers type of.
I think it has the humor. It's just doesn't come like most of Dick's humor. It doesn't come out right away. You know, it's not blatant humor. It's not slapstick or anything like that. It's
I think
Yeah.
centering it more around the TV shop and less around like the home and having kind of
good. We can get Jim Jarmusch to do it. It'll be
yeah,
like smoke or coffee and
coffee and
cigarettes.
cigarettes. The most I've ever felt like I got ripped off by spending money on a movie was Coffee and Cigarettes.
Oh man, I love that movie.
I hated that movie. I was just like, what did I just pay for? But anyways, and I am a fan of Ghost Dog.
Yeah, but you like Jupiter Rising or whatever it is.
Jupiter Ascending.
Yeah.
No, I like one scene in Jupiter Ascending. I tried to convince myself that I liked it because I spent money on it. But so on that note, Dicklike Suggestions. Big D, you want to start us off today?
Yes. I don't think I brought this up before. Mad God?
Oh, the Phil Tippett.
Yes.
No, you have not.
Right. So
Cody
I'll-
Goodfellow is a big fan
I'll-
of that one too.
I'll give you my 2 cents. A beautiful work of stop motion animation. Starring Alex Cox, presumably, the director, although you don't see him, but the director of Repo Man, of course. And then Phil Tippett, I guess, wrote it. Although he mostly does in his career did visual effects, right? For like RoboCop,
Yeah.
Jurassic Park, Starship Troopers, stuff
Star
like that.
Wars.
Right. That's right.
Started on Star Wars, yeah.
And apparently, Mad God, he started in like 1990 when he was working on RoboCop 2. And it's basically,
And
for
he's
me,
worked on it for like 80 years.
yeah, I mean, and it's kind of a,
wormholes.
I see it as like science fictional exploration of Dante's Hell, kind of with imagery that repeatedly made me think of PKD's, various pink beam experiences and psychotic episodes.
Yeah,
Actually-
it is on my list to watch.
It's so,
I
yeah,
wanted to see it too.
I was not expecting it. It's worth checking out for sure.
Awesome.
Frank, do you have any media or TV or books Dick-like suggestion? I didn't ask you ahead of time, so it's okay if you don't.
Well, this is all very dated, but in honor of Pete Bacigalupi in this book, the salesman, or I don't know if he was a salesman in the shop, I'll recommend any of the early stuff by Paolo Bacigalupi.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
which is all wildly inventive but down to earth, just like Philip K. Dick. And
I think the
unfortunately,
Water Knife I've read.
yeah, he's the only author really since the late 80s, 90s that I discovered and really got into.
Mhm.
And it's like his early stories are all great, and they were winning awards, getting nominated and everything. And he had his first novel, The Wind-Up Girl.
Yeah, it was big hit.
The publishers should have been lining up, like a bidding war to get that, his first science fiction novel, and he couldn't get it published with a major house. It was a small press thing, yet it swept the awards. And unfortunately, the commercial forces have since had him off doing young adult stuff, because that was hot for a while. He's finally got a new novel coming out this year that I think is straight fantasy. I don't know much about it, but I'd recommend just going back to reading all his early stuff. There's like one book worth of stories, and his first novel, it's all just set on Earth. There's no time travel crap or space opera stuff. It's all just trying to deal with down to earth issues the way it should be.
The Wind-Up Girl's, he's very much a technician of prose. It's beautifully stylistic. I really like that. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Since Larry is not sitting in his chair, I will go next. This might be 2 episodes in a row that I recommend a book by Lavi Tidar, who is the winner of the World Fantasy Award, of course, for his book Osama, which we had him on the podcast for the 10th anniversary of Osama. But his most recent science fiction novel is Circumference of the World, and I just read it. And I interviewed him for my other podcast, Postcards from a Dying World, about that. And his second to most recent science fiction novel, Neome. Neome is very PKD. It's a robot novel. Circumference of the World is imagining what if L. Ron Hubbard had actually discovered the truth of the universe. And so it's kind of like, what if this golden era science fiction writer did find the truth? And it's partially a meta golden age novel. It's but it keeps getting compared to PKD. I think it's a little bit more golden age, but there are Easter eggs and references to Phil, to A.E. von Vogt, to Asimov, to Samak, and Lavi is definitely one of us. When we got done doing the interview, we nerded out on the unfinished stuff for like an hour and a half, and I got him in trouble with his wife. So, but Lavi's great. Circumference of the World is a really good science fiction novel, and it feels like it's pulled out of time from another era, and I love that about it. So, Circumference of the World by Lavi Tidar. Larry, do you have a suggestion?
Is that the third time you've done Lavi?
I think it's the third time, yeah, because I did Osama and Neome. So, and it's that good. It's really good. But I also just read Cordwainer Smith for the first time. So,
look for that next time.
Yeah, but I would say I read The Planet Buyer, and but I also read his nonfiction book on psychological warfare and just posted the review up on my blog. So check it out.
All right. So my choice this time around.
Is it a video game?
I hope I haven't done this before. I keep thinking I've done everything before. Is a game called Eternal Threads. And basically what it is you're a sort of time cop from the future. And you have to go to the past where an event has happened. And you have to figure out what the event is. So you have these little camera stands that you put around a building or a crime scene or whatever the case may be. And then you witness the characters going about the events that happened before the crime. And you can't actually see the crime, but you can see what happened before. And you have to figure out how the crime happened, why it happened, or the event. Let's say this isn't, because the first one isn't a crime, it's an event. There's a fire in a building and you have to figure out how it started, who started it, why they started it, et cetera, or if it was an accident. And so you go back and forth in time to find out what made the event occur. And it's fun. It's actually a very fun game made by Cosmonaut Studios and released by Secret Mode, which is a company I've never heard of.
All right. Well, then, Professor Wilson, what are we doing next time?
Next time, we're doing in Milton Lumkey territory, and I have 2 little blurbs to read. One from Publishers Weekly, just because it was funny, as Publishers Weekly tends to be, while not trying to be. First published in 1985 by a small press, this realist early novel from dystopian master Philip K. Dick bears the following introductory author's note. Says Phil, this is actually a very funny book, and a good one, too. And that the funny things that happen to real people who come alive. The ending is a happy one, What more can an author say? What more can he give? That is from Publishers Weekly. Then I went to SF Gateway, and here's a description of the book. Bruce Stevens is a young buyer for a big discount house when he meets the recently divorced Susan Fain. She suggests that he might like to manage her ailing typewriter store, and he leaps at the suggestion. Then he realizes that Susan was his teacher, and he was in 5th grade. In spite of that, they are married within days.
Wow.
And then the odd compulsions and instabilities start to interfere with their plans. Milton Lumpke, the paper salesman, in whose area they live, is uneasy about their future.
I have not read anything about this one or read this one before, so
Dave?
I'm going to.
I just like the title. I that's all I know.
I know I'm going to say it wrong 1,000 times, so I'm not a fan of the title. So
By the way, this is our 50th episode, 50th book or movie episode.
Wow.
50th book episode. Okay. Well, it is what it is. All right. On that note, we've been going for a long time, guys. And Frank has dutifully sat in his chair the whole time, and I'm very impressed. Frank, thanks for coming. We've really enjoyed having you here. I kind of wish we'd gotten you in on one of the science fiction books back in the day, but it is what it is. And I really enjoyed having your point of view. Is there anything else do you want DickHeads to find you online or not?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Maybe when you're done, you'll start it all over. Read all the stories, have hundreds of these things. But
We've had requests to do every short story.
We have, yeah.
What I point them to is PKD Otaku, which is where I've written some things, and the piece I'm most proud of, the one I spend most time on, is in number 38. It's called JJ 182, If I Could Publish the Fiction Canon. And it's just a long bibliographic piece organizing all of his fiction. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not a newcomer to the Philip K. Dick canon, but if you want to take a second ride through it, maybe this would be helpful to you.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Frank is active on the PKD fan group on Facebook, which many of us are, and so you can find him correcting me often on there. And
I also expect to be at the festival in June. This is 2024 in Fort Morgan. So
yeah.
Awesome.
All right. So on that note, as always, we remind everyone to keep it paranoid, stay paranoid.
Be all paranoid.
Yeah. And for the love of God, we're done.